Chapter 3. The broad curving view panes of the staff conference room, high in the restored remnant of the Imperial Palace, looked out toward the oldest and busiest of the 3 spaceports serving Imperial City. For safety and security reasons, neither the landing nor the launch patterns brought ships anywhere near the rebuilt administrative complex. But it was still possible to watch their comings and goings, and for the sharp-eyed, to identify familiar types and even individual vessels. On more than one occasion, Leia had come to the conference room to watch the Millennium Falcon leave on a mission or watch impatiently for its return. Rarely, though, did any of the activity at Eastport actually demand the attention of those in the staff conference room. Only the largest ships, the occasional crash landing and explosion, or a full-power launch abort could be heard through the transparisteel. So when the viewpanes began to hum in sympathy with the sound beating on them from outside, both Leia and Akbar glanced up from their work to see why. They saw a bright spherical shape 3 times the size of an ordinary transport descending toward the spaceport. 3 much smaller escorts circled it like planets around a star. At the bottom of the spherical vessel, waves of atmospheric distortion rolled out of scalloped depressions in its hull. "I believe that ship is using Aradian pulse lifters, untempered," said Akbar. "Remarkable. Look how slow and steady the descent is. I shall have to have a closer look at that vessel." "It appears the Duskan delegation is finally here," Leia said. "I guess they don't put their spaceports in family neighborhoods over in the Kornacht cluster." "Are you not going to greet Ambassador Spar?" "First Administrator Eng is there with a protocol droid," Leia said. "I see," said Akbar. "Sending a message?" "Only that they have to understand that President isn't a ceremonial title," Leia said. "But I'm not singling them out. I'm slighting everyone from now on. There are just too many ambassadorial missions arriving each week. I was spending half my day waiting in arrival lounges." Her face wrinkled with annoyance, especially when someone postpones his landing 3 times and always at the last minute. As she spoke, she quietly refolded the blue triangle of Walalan vellum, which a courier had placed in front of her a few moments before, and set it aside. The act did not escape Akbar's notice, since only one of his eyes was trained on the window. "Is that the letter from Senator Paramus?" Leia nodded. "And?" "It's pretty humble," she said. "Excellent." She nodded again. "I wish I had Ben Kilnam's gift. He almost never leaves thumb bruises on the throats of the people he's persuading." "You must find out where he buys his gloves," said Akbar. The Duskan transport was on the ground now, and the escorts were disappearing one after another into a landing bay near the top of the sphere. "Do you have meetings scheduled with Nil Spar?" "In 10 days. "That long? You should allow the first to handle some of the smaller worlds on your schedule. Not merely meeting their delegations, the entire admission process." "Showing them that they're going to be second-class members of the New Republic? I don't think so." "There must be a way to shift some of the weight you're carrying to other shoulders." "I'll take suggestions," she said. But Nil Spar asked for the delay. He's never been to Coruscant before. He said he wants to explore a bit before negotiations occupy. "I see," said Akbar. "Perhaps he's the one sending the message." "I'm not sure," Leia said. She reached out and pulled a datapad across the tabletop toward her. "Well, Admiral, now that it's operational, what shall we do with the Fifth Fleet?" "A trickier question than I thought it would be," admitted Akbar. "Tig Paramus has shown us what we can expect if there is even the appearance of gunboat diplomacy." Leia frowned. "I don't want us afraid to show the flag where it might help cooler heads prevail." "Then I would like to send the new fleet into the 7th Security Zone," said Akbar. I know of several worlds which would welcome even a short visit from a New Republic ship. And I can think of at least 5 pins on the trouble map where a legitimate government has asked for our help on matters where even Senator Paramus can't object if we intervene. Give me an example. There was a new one this morning, Akbar said, folding his hands. The Right Earl of Kalita Prime is appealing for help in dealing with pirate raiders. 6 ships have been attacked within a month, 4 of them successfully. The cargo syndicates are threatening to stop supplying the planet. Good, very good. Go ahead and put together a patrol itinerary for the 5th Fleet, said Leia. Make sure it's heavy on tea parties and rescuing lost children. If there's anyone else in the 7th Security Zone who thinks the way Senator Paramus does, I want his fears put to rest. I can have an itinerary ready before the end of the day. They talked for several minutes more, discussing the deployment of the rest of the New Republic space-going forces. The 2nd Fleet had been on patrol the longest without home leave and shipyard services, while the 1st Fleet had been enjoying the perks of serving as Coruscant's defense force for nearly as long. On Akbar's recommendation, Leia agreed to recall the 2nd Fleet and to send the 1st Fleet to replace it along the crucial border patrol routes the crews called Thunder Alley. It should have been done sooner, said Akbar, but we have had too few pieces to move about the board. I have limited myself to rotating individual vessels back to the yards, out of fear some enemy would take advantage. But if we hold the 5th Fleet here a few days longer, we can make the exchange without leaving either the capital or the frontier unprotected. Do you think there's an enemy still out there? Leia asked. Someone with both the means and the will to take on the entire New Republic? I find myself much more worried about our stability than our security. You have that luxury. I do not, Akbar said. And remember that Admiral Dala is still alive and has the resources of hundreds, perhaps thousands of core worlds to draw upon. She can only grow stronger as time passes, and may well have spies in Imperial City. At that moment, Leia's comlink chirped. Leia? It was Talik Yar. You're needed here at the Senate. There's a problem with your tar petition. Leia stood up from the table. I'm on my way. She turned toward Akbar and said, We can take up the rest this afternoon, when you have an itinerary for me to approve. Then she smiled. You may find that some of the information you need is over at East Point. I'm almost certain of it, Akbar said gravely. Leia's bodyguards fell in beside her as she left the room. The guard changed 4 times a day, but somehow they all seemed the same. Tall, broad-shouldered, alert-eyed, and silent. Leia had nicknamed them the Sniffer and the Shooter. The former was plugged into a backpack full of electrical and chemical sensors. It was his job to make sure no bomb, poison, pathogen, radiation, or microdroid harmed her. He preceded her around corners, through doors, and into closed spaces. The latter wore combat armor, a personal shield, and a Sorosub blaster rifle with backpack generator. Since Leia refused to wear a personal shield, it was his job to place himself between her and any would-be assassin, shield her, and strike down her attackers. Han had gotten the chief of security to order the protection and had won a reluctant promise from Leia to accept it. But Leia had never adjusted to the guard's presence, which seemed ever more unnecessary. And paradoxically, she found that the presence of her personal guards didn't make her feel safer. Just the opposite, since they were a constant reminder that someone might want to kill her. So she had learned to pretend they weren't there, even when they shared a lift car, a scooter, or a slide walk with her. She didn't want to learn their real names or to become friendly with them. Her promise didn't extend that far. She wanted them to be furniture. The only time she acknowledged their presence was when the Sniffer silently signaled an alarm. Then she would let the Shooter guide her to whatever sheltered spot he chose, and would wait there until the sniffer satisfied himself that there was no threat. It happened often enough that it no longer startled her, but infrequently enough that it was only a minor annoyance. Still, Leia never expected it to happen while she was walking along the memorial corridor just outside the walls of the Senate chamber. One moment she was striding briskly past the hollow statuary of the heroes of the rebellion, robes flying, her mind sorting through what she knew about the Yata. Then, in an eye blink, the sniffer sharply raised his hands and the shooter pushed Leia sideways into one of the niches, where the pillar between it and the next offered cover. Her heart was suddenly racing, and her thoughts raced with it. Unreasoning fear brought back the memory of Tig Paramus, livid with anger, looking at her as Vader's daughter instead of as a royal child of Alderaan. Was he angry enough to kill? Had Talik Yar been tricked into betraying her? How horrible to be forced to be afraid here, on the doorstep of the New Republic's most famous symbol of freedom, the first structure to be rebuilt after Imperial factions turned Imperial City into a battle zone. Then, just as suddenly, it was over. "Claire," the shooter said in his emotionless voice, moving aside to allow Leia to emerge from the niche. Frowning crossly, Leia hurried after the sniffer and demanded to know what had prompted the alarm. "I detected a new energy field at the entrance to the Senate Hall," the sniffer said, pointing. "It became active as we approached." Still frowning, Leia strode a few dozen steps farther down the corridor, then stopped short and laughed despite herself. Hanging over the ornate double doors of the Senate chamber was a large holosign. On appearance alone, the sign belonged in a factory beside the entry to the work floor. The text it displayed cemented that impression. It read, "882 days without a shot fired in anger. Remember, peace is no accident." Wearing a smile that was broad enough to touch her eyes, Leia looked left and right for the perpetrators of the joke. "All right, fess up," she called out. "Whose handiwork is this?" Talik Yar emerged from the shadow of a pillar to Leia's left and showed a toothy, self-satisfied grin. "If it works for broken toes, bumped heads, and burned fingers, why not for higher stakes as well?" "I like it," Leia confessed. "But isn't it a bit undignified? Ben Kilnam will never let it stay." "Ben Kilnam helped arrange for it to be installed," said Talik Yar. "And as for dignity, any senator more concerned with dignity than outcomes desperately needs to be reminded why we're here. Wouldn't you agree?" "You are a gem, Talik Yar," she said, surprising him with a hug. She turned back and looked up at the sign. "I do agree, and I think we should have a little celebration when that number reaches 1,000. I'll let it be known. In the meantime, good news. The problem with the Yata has unexpectedly been resolved. My apologies for interrupting your day." He bowed deeply and backed away. "Scamp," she said. Her smile lasted all the way back to her desk. The shipyard boss beamed broadly as he led Han Solo and Chewbacca into the hangar where a gleaming Millennium Falcon rested on its skids. "You're going to be very happy, he said, rubbing his palms together. "I only let my best mechanics touch her." "No droids," Han said in a warning tone, surveying the ship's exterior. "You better not have used any droids. Droids don't understand creative engineering." "No droids," the yard boss said reassuringly. "It was all handwork, which is why the rebuild took so long, of course. The crew chief used to work on Corellian freighters at Toprawa. Stock, of course, nothing like what you have here. But at least he knows the model well enough to spot your modifications." Chewbacca stopped under one of the ship's forward-pointing mandibles, and looked up at the equipment-studded hull plates. Pointing at one of the lower deflector emitters, he turned his head toward Han and loosed a plaintive howl. "What?" asked the yard boss, his gaze quickly settling on the Wookiee's point of concern. "Oh, yes. We realigned all the emitters. You were getting interference nodes to port and starboard. Left her vulnerable to a side attack." "You promised you wouldn't change anything," Han said threateningly. "I promised we'd put her right, and that's what we did," the yard boss said, leading the way to the boarding ramp. "First, we took her apart down to the frame. Then we took the frame apart. We have hollows. You'll have to see how twisted some of the ribs and stringers were. Structurally, she's about 15% new." Han walked right past the boarding ramp, continuing to circle the ship as though doing a pre-flight check. "Yeah, well, she's had a few bumps. Never failed me in the clutch, though." Chewbacca voiced his agreement in a defiant, guttural growl. Frowning, the yard boss came back down the ramp and fell in behind them. "Well, that's a small miracle, considering what we found under the access panels. How you serviced her systems the way she was, I'll never know. When we built her back up, all the cables were properly tagged and bundled, all the mechanicals shock-mounted, all the electricals grounded and pulse-shielded." "I knew I should have been keeping an eye on you," Han said. "Probably added a couple of tons to her displacement." "She's 300 kilos lighter." "I would have done it all myself, you know. But there just isn't time anymore." Chewie grunted expressively. "Yeah, I couldn't stand to see her all in pieces either," Han agreed. "Not with someone else's hands in her guts. Autopsies and rebuilds, don't want to be around either one." He paused, looking up at the drive matrix. "Say, is that a Sinar Systems augmenter?" "It is." "Well, I'll be a—" His expression softened to wonder. "We tried for years to get one of those on the black market, remember, Chewie? But every time we got a lead on one, it turned out to be pre-Imperial junk, or something pulled out of the wreck of a TIE fighter, with the scorch marks painted over. How did you—" The yard boss smiled. "Don't ask, General." Chewbacca yawned a comment under his breath, and Han answered with a crooked smile. "Yeah, I guess there are a few advantages to wearing a braid." He cocked his head at the yard boss. "So, are there any more surprises?" "A few," the yard boss said, reclaiming the role of tour guide. "We replaced your missing escape pods, upgraded the tractor beam generator to a Mach 7, and the hyperdrive motivator to a Series 401. "Holy mother of meteors." "Replaced all the sensor lenses, duplicated an original YT-1300 battery regulator from Corellian specs." "That was probably a mistake." "Recarpeted the holds and crew quarters, fixed the sticky latch on the number 2 storage locker, recharged the sanitizer in the refresher." He smiled. "Want to take her for a spin?" Gesturing with one furry hand, Chewbacca registered his vote. "Yeah, all that history gone. It won't be the same Falcon without the creaks and the shakes," Han said. "No, it won't," said the Iron Boss. "She'll be about 20% faster, 10% more efficient, and 100% more reliable." "Keys in the ignition?" The Yard Boss nodded. "The security system's been reinitialized for you. Just enter new authorization codes." Han looked at Chewbacca. "I think Leia can get by without us for a little longer. Let's ring her out a little." "Have fun," the Yard Boss said, his self-satisfied smile restored to full brightness. "You're already cleared for orbit." Waving their ID cards at the scanners, Han and Chewbacca entered the grounds of the presidential residence in full stride, and in the middle of a full-blown argument. I know she's perfect," Han said. "I know! We couldn't have gotten her into that kind of shape in a year of weekends. So what? I hate perfect." Chewbacca shook his head and uttered a long, whining growl that bespoke his frustration. I am not being unreasonable. How can you say that? Han demanded, raising his hands in disgust. Weren't you paying attention? Were you even listening while we were landing? Jerking his head back sharply, Chewbacca grunted a sharp retort. That's right. Hardly a sound. She's as tight as a new boot, Han said, stopping and turning on his friend. Listen, buddy, I hate new boots. I like my boots covered with scuffs, worn just this side of falling apart, with room for my toes and a little roll in the heels. All those noises they took out, that's how I used to know when I was pushing her. How am I going to know how hard we're hit next time we're in a scrap? Chewbacca shook his head and growled his disgust. I thought you'd understand, Han said plaintively. Chewie, they replaced the cushions on the acceleration couches. His tone was rich with indignation. Don't they understand why people keep old furniture around the house? It's not my Falcon. It feels like I'm sitting in somebody else's ship. I tell you, I'm going to have to take a whole day to go around with a wrench and start loosening things. Somewhere in the middle of Han's tirade, Chewbacca stopped listening to him. He stood straighter and cocked his head while attending to a sound from farther away. Finally, he grabbed Han by the shoulder and gave him a little shake to interrupt him. "Arua!" the Wookiee said chidingly. "What?" Han said, twisting around to look toward the gardens. "I didn't hear her." Together they hurried down the walk toward Leia's voice. They found her on the back lawn, Taylor sitting on the grass with a data pad in her lap. Nearby, all three children lay side by side on their backs, with eyes either closed or staring blankly upward. "I thought you'd be back long before this," Leia said, with a hint of impatience in her voice. "I had to postpone an appointment with Senator Noem." Han looked down, embarrassed. "Sorry, honey," he said, sitting beside her and reaching for her hand. "There were problems at the yard." "And I'll bet you caused most of them," she said, leaning over to kiss his cheek. "Right, Chewie?" The bronze-furred Wookiee looked away, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and scratched his head distractedly. "It's okay, Chewie," Han said. "I'll rat on myself so you don't have to." He nodded toward the children, who had neither moved nor made a sound since he and Chewbacca had arrived. "What did you do to them? Kill them?" Jaina giggled at that, spoiling the effect. "It's an exercise," Leia said. "What? To see who can levitate the longest?" "Bite your tongue," said Leia sharply. "They're working on feeling the force flowing through the grass, through each separate plant, without disturbing the flow. It's one of the Jedi disciplines of moving lightly, leaving no sign." Chewbacca growled. "Don't look at me, Chewie," said Han, lying back in the grass. "The best discipline I know is the sentence, 'Wait till your mother gets home.'" Leia smiled and poked him with a forefinger. "I feel like I hardly know enough myself to be their teacher," she said with a sigh, "but I have to do what I can." More loudly, she added, "All right, children, that's enough." One after another, Jason, Jaina, and Anakin sat up. Jason plucked a blade of grass and started trying to whistle through it, drawing a glare from his sister and a look of injured surprise from his younger brother. "Tell me what you learned," Leia said. Jaina looked toward her parents. "The grass doesn't mind being walked on, but it does feel it." "Everything that's alive can feel what happens to it," said Leia. "That's an important truth to remember. Anakin, Jason, what about you?" Anakin laced his fingers behind his neck as a pillow. "I don't know if I learned something or made it up." "Tell us." "Well, I was looking at the clouds, and I thought I could feel the grass looking at them too, like they were wondering if it was going to rain." "I'm sure the grass is aware of the weather," Leia said, "but wondering is something conscious beings are blessed with." "Or cursed," said Han. "I learned that the grass thinks Jaina smells bad," Jason said impishly, giving his twin a push and rolling away from her. "Can we go in the pool, Mother?" "All right," she said, accepting that the exercise was over. 3 small bodies scrambled up from the grass and ran fleet-footedly toward the courtyard and the vortex pool. "I can go watch them," Hans said, sitting up. "Stay, they'll be all right," Leia said, shielding her eyes. "Chewie, you look even taller than usual from down here. I hope your mate is bigger than me. Did you have as hard a time as my dear husband did, letting someone else work on his jalopy?" Chewbacca crouched down, sitting on his heels with an easy balance that reminded Han that his friend came from an arboreal planet. Lifting his face to the sky, he growled proudly. "Oh, right, fine. You're the practical one, and I'm the hot-tempered one," Han said. "Have you ever heard such character assassination?" "Don't worry, dear," Leia said, patting his hand. "I won't let him change how I feel about you." The Wookiee's first grunt was a retort, the second a question. "Of course, go ahead," said Leia. Rolling his head from side to side on his neck, Chewbacca loosed a long, well-modulated growl. Before it was over, Han sat up with a start, staring at Chewbacca. "Go home?" he demanded. "Go home?" "Of course," Leia said to Chewbacca. "You have a family of your own, a mate and a child. Your responsibility to them is every bit as important as the obligations you feel toward us. Tell him, Han." "Huh? Look who's going to help me put the Falcon out of order again." Leia poked him in the ribs. "Ow!" "Try again," she said. "I guess it's been a long time, pal," Han said, wearing a rueful expression. "Family won't recognize you if you don't get back there soon and spend more time hanging around the home tree." Chewbacca shook his head up and down as he answered. "Of course we understand," Leia said. "You've been here taking care of our kids instead of on Kashyyyk with your own. You really should be there for Lumpawaru's coming of age. We insist you go. I feel bad that we've been so selfish." The Wookiee answered with an uncharacteristically tentative growl. "No, we'll manage just fine," Leia said. "The kids are safe here, and we're not going to be running all over the galaxy. And Luke is on Coruscant." "Leia?" "And he'll be helping us with the children. No, don't give it a second thought. You should leave as soon as you can pack. Tell him, Han." Han nodded. "Leia's right, old buddy. It's a good time. Things are quiet. We'll miss you, but you've been standing watch on our bridge long enough." Subtle movements of muscles under fur marked Chewbacca's relief and gratitude. "Grog?" he asked, cocking his head. "Shoot, pal," said Han, showing an easy grin. But his face paled and his eyes widened as Chewbacca asked his second favor. "Oh, no. Oh, no. You can't ask me that. I just got her back after 167 days on the hook." Chewbacca's grunt was terse and snide. "I don't care if I said I hated new boots," Han said. "I hate having someone else's feet in my boots even more. Friendship only goes so far." "What are you talking about?" Leia demanded. "Oh, he's just trying to hold me to my own words. I don't have to be consistent if I don't want to." With a peevish growl, Chewbacca stood and started to turn away. "Don't you move, Chewie," Leia said sharply. "Han, come on. You should lend him the Falcon." "Well, I don't want to," Han said, getting to his feet and pacing nervously. "I don't want her bouncing around hyperspace without me. I want her where I know the worst thing that can happen is that some overeager mechanic with a torque wrench will come along and tighten all the connectors to spec. And you know how Wookiees fly. He'll redline it the whole way there and back." Leia shook her head. "And you wonder why Jason gives us a hard time." "Ah, rah, rah, roo, Chewbacca said plaintively to Leia. "You hear that?" Leia said. "Han, dear. How many years of Chewie's life have you taken so far? How long have you kept him away from Kashyyyk?" "Me? I didn't do it. It's that crazy Wookiee life debt stuff. I'd be glad to let him off the hook." "The least you could do is let him go back a hero. in the ship both of you made famous. Think what that would mean to Chewie's son, to his mate. It might go a long way toward making up for Chewie's absence, to know that he was doing something that mattered, to see him honored." "I suppose," Han said dubiously. "And he's your friend. You wouldn't want him to think you were willing to lend the Millennium Falcon to Lando." Han shook a finger warningly. "That's different. That was war, and I still didn't like it." "But not to him. You wouldn't want him to think you were willing to lose the Falcon to Lando in a sabacc game, but you wouldn't lend it—" "Her, not it." "To Chewbacca for his homecoming. You wouldn't want to hurt his feelings like that, would you?" Holding his head in his hands as though trying to massage away a headache, Han looked from Leia to Chewbacca and back to Leia again. He squinted, frowned, chewed his lower lip, shook his head. His mouth worked, and he made a noise that sounded something like, "Not fair." "What?" said Leia. "What did you say?" Han cleared his throat and looked straight at Chewbacca. "I said I guess if we need a lift somewhere while you're gone, either the President or the Princess can probably arrange something." Chewbacca crowed his delight and rushed forward to hug Han. "But you'd better take care of her," Han added quickly, squirming uncomfortably in the Wookiee's crushing embrace. "I want her back without a scratch, do you hear me? Not a scratch. And fill the tanks before you leave Kashyyyk. I'm not paying for your conjugal visits." The only response Chewbacca made was to ruffle Han's hair while he showed a toothy, open-mouthed grin. When Chewbacca was gone, Leia drew Han into a gentler and more agreeable embrace. "I'm proud of you," she said. "He'd never say anything to either of us, but he still hasn't stopped feeling awful inside about the kidnapping of the kids." Han did not have to ask Leia how she knew about Chewbacca's private pain. It wasn't his fault. "You'll never convince him of that. He feels guilty for failing us, and he feels guilty for neglecting his own. He really needs to go home and get his confidence back." She drew back and smiled up at her husband. "And from what I hear, looking after Wookiee children is good practice for looking after Jedi children." "Maybe I should go with him." "You don't need to," she said, and kissed him. "Yeah, well, fine," Han said. "I'll tell you this much, though. Luke had better come teach the kids how to flap their arms and fly, because I'm never giving Jason the codes to the Falcon. Not in my lifetime, anyway." "Why? Didn't you start piloting everything in sight as soon as you could?" "Of course I did," Han said indignantly. "Why do you think I'm worried?" The unmarked office of Admiral Drayson lay buried inside 5 security perimeters and hidden behind a curtain of misinformation and plausible deniability. The section he commanded had no publicly known name. The private name, Alpha Blue, was known only to the dozen officials with the very highest clearances and appeared nowhere in either the government's or the military command's data records. Those whom Drayson commanded carried no Alpha Blue identification cards and passed under no Alpha Blue insignia on the way to their jobs. They wore the insignia of a variety of unremarkable units, or, like Drayson himself, no insignia at all, and took their pay as quartermaster's mates and second gunners, ion mechanics, and civilian clerks. Given that context, Drayson was just a little surprised the morning he entered his office and found someone already there, uninvited and unannounced. Someone who did not work for him and yet was bold enough to sit in Drayson's chair with his feet up on the corner of Drayson's desk. "Well," Drayson said, "Lando Calrissian, you're lucky I didn't shoot you." Lando grinned. "I was counting on your being too curious how I got in to shoot me right away." "I said shoot you, not kill you. Blowing apart your knee would have been sufficient," Drayson said. "Now, please get out of my chair. Oh, if you insist, Lando said, vacating the chair with a flourish that left it slowly spinning. I was just following my dear mother's advice. On breaking and entering, on avoiding stress. Never stand when you can sit down, and never sit when you can lie down. I see, Drayson said, stopping the rotation of his chair with a hand and dropping into it. I haven't heard anything of you in some time. I doubt that. Not since Mara Jade showed such surprising resistance to your charms. How kind of you to remember. Drayson steepled his fingers. My own theory is that you've been consoling yourself by spending the reward from Duchess Mistel in sabacc halls and on pleasure couches. Anything left of it? Lando smiled and sat on the edge of the desk. I'm sure you could tell me to the half credit. You never have forgiven me for the fact that because you and your Chandrilla goons could never catch me in the Falcon, have you? Or for the fact that you caught so many of the dumb and clumsy smugglers I made a fortune on my Chandrilla runs. I really should have given you a share. You never have gotten over this notion that smuggling is an honorable line of work, have you? Drayson asked, tipping back in his chair. What makes you think I would have taken your dirty money? Because I knew what kind of chit the Admiral of Chandrilla Defense Fleet was drawing, Lando said. Every good smuggler knows that bribes will get him places bravado won't. For the first time, Drayson smiled. You know, Baron, I really hate the fact that I can't help but like you. I know, Lando said. I have the same problem. I never thought I could be friends with someone who was so fond of rules. Well, life is full of surprises. Not that seeing you is one. To tell the truth, why start now? I've been half expecting to see you since I heard that Lady Luck had docked upstairs. Though I didn't think it'd be with your feet up on my desk like you were taking over. Drayson folded his arms over his chest. So, what can I do for you? Wrong question, Admiral, Lando said. What can I do for you? Pardon? I'm bored, Lando explained simply. I go in business, I make a little money. I lose a little money. The game isn't interesting anymore. Someone throws a title at me and I pick up the pieces someone else dropped, until one day I realize I'm sitting behind a desk turning into you. There's no challenge in smuggling, unless you want to go to the core, and I'm too smart to be that dumb. And there's hardly a scrap anywhere in 20 parsecs worth getting dirty for. That's why I'm here. You're bored, Drayson repeated. Exactly. Find something interesting for me to do, and I'll tell you how I got past your perimeters. His expression was suddenly touched with regret. I'm afraid there are a couple of security types you're going to have to let go, though. I see, said Drayson. Any particular reason you happen to find yourself afflicted by boredom at this moment in time? Why do you ask? Drayson pursed his lips. I can't say anything more unless you come back in. Will I be sorry if I do? Aren't you always? General Lando Calrissian and Admiral Drayson, Chief of Alpha Blue, stood before a large briefing screen studying a hollow image of a strange space vessel. The vessel's 5 cylindrical hulls, lying parallel to each other like a bundle of logs, were so dark in color that it was hard to see much detail. But the sensor's scale markings along the edge of the frame betrayed its size. I give up, Lando said finally. I almost want to say it's Mon Calamari construction, but I don't think they ever built anything that big. What is it? The Telgcon Vagabond. When Lando's face showed no signs of recognition, Drayson asked, Are you familiar with the legend of the Another Chance? Lando cocked an eyebrow questioningly. The Alderaan armory ship? Of course. Every smuggler in that sector has a story about seeing it. Which means that every smuggler in that sector is a bald-faced liar. You don't believe the legend, then? Revisionist history, Lando said, shaking his head. Explain. I just can't believe that when the pacifists took over Alderaan's Council of Elders, they were cynical enough to pack all the weapons into a ship and send it hopping through hyperspace. They just had reason to wish they had done it when the Empire came knocking a few years later. Lando sighed deeply. Believe me, I wish the legend was true. I wish they'd recalled another chance before the Death Star reached Alderaan, but it's just another shaggy ghost ship story. I agree, Drayson said, reaching out and tapping the surface of the screen. But this is a real ghost ship. Probably the one that's kept the legend of another chance alive. This holo was taken by the New Republic frigate Boldheart 5 years ago, right in the middle of that business with Admiral Dawa. Lando smiled wryly, remembering just how close that business had come to being the end of the New Republic. Just after this image was taken, Boldheart fired across the Vagabond's bow, Drayson continued. The Vagabond fired back with some weapons we still don't understand, disabling Boldheart's engines with one shot. Then it jumped into hyperspace. It wasn't seen again for almost 2 years. Bored yet? No, go on. Admiral Drayson turned away from the briefing display and walked back to a seat at the conference bar. That was actually the second documented sighting. The first to spot it was a Roskis monitor ship working the Telchcon system. Thus, the name. Right. The Roskis took it for a derelict and tried to intercept it. Now, mind you, they'd been hailing it for hours, and not a peep in reply. Then the Vagabond broadcast a 5-second wide-spectrum modulation that nearly burned out every comm circuit on the Roskis ship. There's a recording, but it's so distorted it's almost useless. Anyway, 30 seconds after it sent the signal, let me guess, skipped into hyperspace. On the numbers. What about the third sighting? That was ours. We thought we were going to be smart. An intelligence service ferret tried to attach a locator limpet to the Vagabond's hull. Never even got close. And the fourth? Drayson leaned back in his chair and drummed his fingertips on the armrest. It's in deep space, near Gamar Ascalon right now. We're trailing it with another ferret. Keeping a safe distance, I hope. Very safe, but we're going after it, Drayson said. Intelligence is putting together a small task force this very minute. They mean to catch the Vagabond, board it, and unravel the riddles. Colonel Pakpakat of the Intelligence Service is in charge. If you'd come to me even a week from now, it would have been too late. They'd already have sailed. Is that so? Lando said, his face as unreadable as if he were at a sabbat table. What fortuitous timing. Indeed. So, is that interesting enough? It's an interesting story, Lando said pointedly. I don't see anything interesting to do yet, though. Drayson's expression turned gravely serious. I'd like to put you on Pakpakat's ship, nominally as fleet liaison. Boldheart was regular Navy, after all. Intelligence can't deny that they have an interest. But I'd really be there for you? No, said Drayson. I could have put any number of Alpha Blue agents in the task force. In fact, you don't know that I haven't. No, I don't want you to report to me. Then why do you want me on the mission? Because you think like a smuggler, and Pakpakat thinks like a colonel. Because you have a way of getting yourself where people don't want you, past traps that others don't see until it's too late. Because I think the mission has a better chance of succeeding if you're there than if you aren't. That's all. That's all. That's my job, Drayson said. To make sure that some things happen, and make sure others don't. So, make up your mind. Are you interested? Want to go chase the Telchcon Vagabond? Lando just grinned.